All right, everyone. Welcome to this month's masterclass, which is going to be on EMFs. Many people ask me about EMFs in regards to health. Probably many of you watching this video have asked me in the past. I figured it's time to have a discussion. So you'll see EMF out there all over the place, right? A lot of people I don't really think understand what it means or what they are or how they can impact our health. So I figure great place to start this month on a masterclass. EMFs, what are they? Okay, it stands for electromagnetic fields. Okay, fields of electricity that are all around us, all the time, even before the birth of electricity. Okay, they exist on a spectrum, kind of like the spectrum of light, right? Like visible light and non-visible light, sound, right? Things we can hear, things we can't hear. So they exist on a spectrum. It depends on the wavelengths of the electricity and the frequency. When we talk about physics, for example, which is what we're looking at here, think about waves, right, in an ocean, right? The length between the waves, and then how frequently they go up and down or long, right? So now there's two types of EMFs, two types of electromagnetic fields. One has the capacity to break down chemical bonds and the other one does not. Okay, so one is relatively innocuous and one of them is harmful, hypothetically. Okay, let's start with first something known as ionizing radiation, right? So there's a field of ionizing radiation or an ionizing electromagnetic field has a much higher frequency, right? So the waves are going like this really fast and there's really short distance in between the waves, okay? The energy from this type of radiation can remove electrons, right? You probably forgot this a long time ago, right? But an atom is made up of neutrons and protons in the middle, and then the electrons swirl around the outside, kind of like in our solar system, right? Like moons around a planet. Now, there's different levels, layers of electrons. There's outer shells, inner shells. Okay. This type of energy can remove electrons from that outer shell, so it can compromise. So we're breaking down bonds, breaking down electromagnetic chemical bonds, okay? And in humans, right, if we get exposed to high doses of this kind of radiation, it can it can remove these atoms and cause what are known as free radicals, okay? I'm sure many of you have heard of that term, which in humans cause something called oxidative stress, which means cellular damage, tissue damage, okay? Now, what are some common sources, right? Some of them are useful, right? Like gamma rays, which can be used to help target specific tumors and things. X-rays, everyone knows X-rays, okay? Visible light, right, that we're seeing is right in the middle of the spectrum. So it's kind of like the dividing line between ionizing radiation, which is typically not good, and non-ionizing radiation, which is the other type of EMF. So non-ionizing, okay? Average typical levels of non-ionizing radiation should not really affect human health. Okay, in ordinary circumstances, they'll simply pass through without causing issues because they have very long wavelengths, right, and low frequency. Now, a lot of research out there on these types of radiations. Look, we know ionizing radiation is bad, okay, for the most part. A lot of controversy surrounding non-ionizing radiation, for example, like from cell phones, those kinds of things, microwaves, right? So there's been a lot of research. I went through a lot of it, kind of looking in preparation for this training. Look, the data is mixed. Most of your studies out there don't show a direct correlation between these non-ionizing radiations and their effect on human health. Now, obviously, some non-ionizing radiation, like microwaves, can create heat, and that can cause damage to tissue also, but that's as a result of the heat and not necessarily the waves themselves, okay? Again, in certain scientific settings or industrial settings, sure, could you be exposed to very high doses of non-ionized radiation? It's going to increase the risk of tissue damage, sure. Again, more certain tissues are more vulnerable, right? Eyes, reproductive organs, thyroid, right? That's why they get a dental x-rays. They put this big lead shield on you. It covers your private areas and your thyroid and the whole 9 yards. Again, longer wavelength, lower frequency, cannot break down chemical bonds. Okay. Again, many forms, radio waves, microwaves, infrared lights, things like that. Now, how do you test for EMF exposure, right? How do you know like how much EMFs there are? So there's the two types, right? Ionizing, non-ionizing. Let's kind of move on to like testing and protection and all that kind of stuff. Now, how do you test for exposure, or how do you test to see what kind of EMFs are around you in any given environment? Again, some companies do this on an industrial level. They'll do field surveys to look at the levels and safety of radiation in a building, areas, geographical regions, that kind of thing. For home use, you can get an EMF meter, and these can be purchased relatively inexpensively online. Amazon, they're available for home use. They're pretty cool. Literally a handheld meter, almost like Ghostbusters style, right? It's a handheld meter that will measure the electromagnetic field and the strength of it in a particular environment. So pretty cool, pretty cool. Obviously, you can check if someone feels they've been exposed to like high levels of EMFs. There are blood tests that can look for exposure to ionizing radiation. Those are unusual situations. Obviously, if it's like a meltdown in a nuclear power plant or something like that, right? So hopefully we don't really have to worry about those. Okay. Now, let's talk about some of the kind of the bigger controversies and help to kind of separate maybe some fiction from fact when it comes to EMFs, right? Much of the research has been done as it applies most recently, of course, to cell phones, right? Cell phone radiation. And then also talk about, okay, protection or blocking from EMFs, obviously harmful EMFs, but even to be honest with you, as our world becomes a bigger soup bowl of EMFs, right, with 5G and also that kind of stuff going on, it's still not a bad idea, even if the evidence isn't super conclusive, to try and shield ourselves or block or protect ourselves from a lot of these EMFs that are around, right? So again, still some debate around the potential of cell phone radiation or other radio frequencies, and cause Wi-Fi's, things like that, Bluetooth causing things like cancer. A lot of studies, American Cancer Society, National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, have done some of these. They say, of course, as most research articles do, that more is needed, more research is needed. But to be honest with you, most of the studies out there do not really show a definitive link, like these cell phones cause cancer. There are some, maybes out there, but what it always comes down to is that no matter what a study says, that these types of wavelengths should be completely harmless to humans, I have had plenty of patients over the years, and continue to, that yes, do seem to be more sensitive to these EMFs than others. Okay. And again, most of what will happen is you'll see signs and symptoms within the central nervous system. So you'll see, anxiety and difficulty sleeping and things like that when exposed to these types of radiations. Again, in those particular instances, I obviously recommend people get some meters, measure. There may be some protection that needs to be done at home, at work, cars, that kind of thing, Let's go over some of the basics as far as how do we neutralize EMFs if we care to. And again, we're surrounded by lots of stuff all the time. If someone is really not having an issue with them, some of these things may not be necessary, not going to hurt. But let's talk, before we look at any particular type, let's talk about how they work, right? How do you neutralize, or how do you block, if you will? Can't really block, but how do you neutralize EMFs? Okay, let's talk about how they work. Okay. Most everyone watching this, I'm sure, is familiar with a radiation shield, right? Like either lead, like you wear it like dental office. There's also something called Faraday Fabric. Okay, it's designed to block EMF radiations altogether. The technology is based on the principle of a Faraday cage, which has been well known for a long time. Basically, a wire or a mesh cage is arranged in a certain geometric pattern so that it takes the radiation coming in and it redirects it. Okay, it works great on a small scale. For example, they have Faraday bags or pouches that you can put your cell phone in, your smartphone, that can help with some of this radiation. But for most people, they're not going to. It's not really practical to install like this giant Faraday cage around their house, right? They're not going to build this giant cage, or they're not going to hang like fabric, like Faraday fabric on the walls, right? So, and again, lead shielding, things like that, not really practical. So in most cases, you wouldn't even want to completely block EMFs anyway, because your phone wouldn't work, your Wi-Fi wouldn't work, right, if you block all these EMFs. Plus, there'd still be radiation inside coming from light bulbs and TVs and wires in the walls and all that kind of stuff. So even if you covered your entire house in this giant Faraday tent of fabric, you still might have issues, right? So, okay, what's a better solution? So, especially if you want to protect yourself at home, right? This is where we spend a lot of our time, where I work. It's probably not what you think. So, what causes most people to have trouble with EMFs in the first place isn't actually the radiation itself. It's what scientists call incoherence, right? So incoherence is the irregularity in the radiation waves. Okay, basically, like instead of coming out like this, a nice smooth pattern, the waves can be all over the place. Okay, that most of the time is what doesn't jive with people's nervous systems. Okay, so, but there's actually an easier way than like tenting your house with Faraday fabric. It very similar to works like a noise canceling headphone, right? So if you think about it, EMFs are just like sound, they're waves. Okay, noise canceling headphones, they have this built-in, device that detects background noise and takes the noise where there's like this irregular spike, and it smooths it out, right? So that it blocks certain sound waves and lets other ones in, right? So you don't hear the background noise, you just hear what you want to hear. Okay. An EMF neutralizer works the same way. Okay. It filters out all that background EMF radiation, and then it produces like a smoothness to take that incoherence, that jaggedness, and smooth it out. So it doesn't completely eliminate EMF radiation, but it has a couple of benefits. First of all, it's practical, right? It's easier to use at home. You're not going to build a Faraday cage around your house, but you can plug this little device into an outlet. And another thing, obviously, you can still use your electronic devices. They'll work just fine with with this neutralizer in place. Okay. So if, and again, there's lots of them out there, but if, anyone watching this wanted to do anything, and I've had patients do all kinds of stuff. I've had patients put those Faraday cages around their electric meters. I've had patients, insert grounding poles into their yard and attach to their house, to try and disperse some of these EMFs. The reality of it is it's really impossible to get away from them. It really is. I think it's important to recognize the difference between the two. That's kind of why we started there. Again, most of what we talk about with EMFs is the non-ionizing type that comes from regular devices, Wi-Fi, cell phones. How can that affect our health? Bottom line, for me, with my recommendations, again, the research is could, might not. Ultimately, it's inconclusive at this point, from what I saw, from what I have seen. If you don't feel you're sensitive to EMFs, I wouldn't go nuts, like tenting your house or things like that. If you do feel that it really affects you, there may be some of those things that you're going to want to do. Faraday cages around electric meters, for example. Either way, it's never going to hurt to help to try and neutralize EMFs in our environment, so that even if but 20 years from now we find out that they are a problem, never hurt, an ounce of prevention worth more than a pound of cure, right? So people come to me all the time, they ask my opinion on these things. I tell them, listen, those EMF neutralizers, like we talked about, to help smooth out that coherence, they plug into a wall outlet to fill a room, to help with the EMFs in a room. I think that's your safest, most practical, most effective technique against EMFs in a residential or in a work setting. That's typically my recommendation. Either if you don't feel like they affect you, don't make yourself nuts about it, right? Number one. Number two, if you just want to take precautions and be proactive, the EMF neutralizer is the way to go, as opposed to some of these other kind of gimmicky, hokey things out. You'll see all kinds of things. You'll see coils and all this crazy stuff. The things that do work, lead shielding, Faraday Fabric, cages, stuff like that, they work, just not practical. The EMF neutralizer takes those same basic physics, foundations of physics, especially as it relates to electromagnetic fields and electromagnetic waves, and puts them into a more practical, easier to use, affordable home option. So, all right, EMF masterclass for this month. Let me know if you have any questions. If there's something I didn't cover that you have a question on, please let me know. Otherwise, I can't wait to see you until next month. I think on the docket, I was already planning next month, we're going to do a super deep dive into leaky gut and some of the research behind it, how it affects different health conditions and all that kind of stuff. Super widespread, kind of like EMFs, with a lot of people dealing with, obviously, their exposure or dealing with having it. So I think that's what we're going to do next. If you have any EMF questions, let me know, post them, shoot me a message. And anything I didn't cover that you need clarification on, let me know. But I hope this was helpful for you. And until next time.